he left something for you in Singapore. The retired judge told me at my mother's funeral. Go to the address on this card. Tell them her name. They'll know what to do. I remember the cold more than anything. It was February in Halifax, and the wind off the harbor had that particular bite that gets into your coat no matter how many layers you're wearing. The cemetery was small, old, the kind where the stones lean slightly from decades of frost heave. My mother had chosen it herself years ago. She liked that it was quiet. There were maybe 12 people at the service, a few neighbors from her street in Dartmouth, a woman from her church who had brought a casserole the week before and hadn't known what else to do, my mother's colleague from the hospital where she'd worked for 22 years, and the judge. I didn't recognize him at first. He was in his late 70s, heavy wool coat, standing slightly apart from the others. He waited until nearly everyone had gone before he approached me. I'm so sorry for your loss, he said. Your mother was one of the finest people I ever knew. I thanked him. I didn't know who he was yet. He handed me a card. Plain white, no law firm logo, no crest. Just a Singapore phone number and an address written in careful block letters. He told me she had asked him to give it to me after she was gone. Then he said what he said about Singapore. Before I could ask anything, he nodded once and walked back to his car. I stood there holding the card with one hand and my mother's funeral program in the other. She had been a palliative care nurse. She had worked night shifts for most of my childhood, volunteered on weekends at a hospice in Bedford, and driven a 2009 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door that she kept meaning to fix. She had not been the kind of person you associated with Singapore. My older brother, Marcus, found me by the graveside a few minutes later. So, he said, what happens now with the house? She'd been in the ground for less than an hour. I don't know yet, I told him. He exhaled slowly. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. She didn't leave a lot, so whatever there is, we split it clean. There was something in the way he said clean that bothered me. Not grief. Calculation. I didn't mention the card. That evening I drove back to my mother's house in Dartmouth. I'd been staying there for the 2 weeks since she'd gone into the hospital the last time, and it still smelled like her. Lavender hand lotion and something faintly medicinal. Her reading glasses were folded on the kitchen table beside a crossword puzzle she hadn't finished. I walked through the rooms slowly. Nothing about her life suggested international finance. Her furniture was second-hand. Her bookshelves were full of nursing textbooks and old Maclean's magazines and 3 decades worth of mystery novels. Her kitchen had a coupon organizer on the counter that she updated every week. But then I opened the drawer in her bedroom nightstand that I had never opened before. Inside was a thin manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on it in her handwriting. Underneath it was a small leather folder. Inside the folder was a passport. I sat down on the edge of her bed and opened it. The stamps went back 15 years. Singapore, repeatedly. Hong Kong. The Cayman Islands. Zurich, twice. All of them in the last decade. Trips. All of them in the last decade. Trips I had never known she took. I sat there for a long time. Marcus called at 9. Have you gone through her documents yet? He asked. It hasn't even been a day. I know. I just don't want anything to get missed. If there's an RRSP or a TFSA we should know about before the estate gets complicated. He had learned some vocabulary, I noticed. There's a will, I said. We'll go through it with the lawyer next week. He exhaled again. Yeah. Okay, just don't make any decisions without me. After I hung up, I looked at the passport again. I looked at the card from the judge. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea the way my mother always made it. Bag in first, boiling water. 2 minutes exactly, a small splash of milk. I sat at her table and looked at her unfinished crossword. She had filled in 3 across, statey. I called the Singapore number the next morning. A man answered. His English was precise and unhurried. I gave him my mother's name. There was a pause. Yes, he said. We've been expecting to hear from you. Are you her daughter? I said yes. He asked when I could travel. He said to bring government-issued identification and a copy of the death certificate. He said there was no urgency, but that the matter was time-sensitive in a general administrative sense. He didn't mention money. I booked a flight 4 days later. I didn't tell Marcus. I told him I was dealing with the funeral home paperwork and that the estate lawyer needed some documents sorted. That was enough to buy me a week. The morning before my flight, he drove up from Moncton without calling first. I heard his truck in the driveway and felt something tighten in my chest. He let himself in with the spare key he still had from years ago. He looked around the living room the way you look at a room when you're trying to estimate its value. "Smaller than I remembered," he said. "It's the same size it's always been." He ran a hand along the mantel above the fireplace where she kept photographs. A few of us as kids, one of her nursing graduating class, one of her and my father taken sometime in the 90s before he left. "Hard to believe this is it," he said. "It's her home." He turned toward me. "I just don't want you getting sentimental and making decisions that are practical." "It's been 5 days," I said. He sat at the kitchen table. "She lived carefully," he said. "I get that. But careful doesn't mean she had anything put away. I know how she lived." He leaned back in her chair. "You know she loaned me money, more than once." "I know. She said it wasn't a big deal." He rubbed his jaw, said I'd figure it out eventually. "You didn't really," I said quietly. "That landed somewhere." He looked at the table. "Easy for you to say. You have a stable job. You stayed close to her." "I was close to her because I showed up." He didn't answer that. After a moment he said, "She always thought you were the responsible one." "She thought you were capable," I said. "That's different." He left about an hour later. I finished packing my suitcase. I put the sealed envelope with my name on it inside my carry-on, along with the death certificate, my passport, and hers. I wasn't sure why I brought hers. It felt right. The flight from Halifax to Singapore was 19 hours with a connection in Tokyo. I had enough time to think about the years after my father left, when she worked double shifts at the hospital and still managed to show up at my school concerts and Marcus's hockey games. The years when she drove Marcus to treatment twice and never once said a word to anyone outside the family. The years when she sat with strangers at the end of their lives and held their hands. She never mentioned Singapore. When I landed, it was 32 degrees, and the air was thick in a way that Nova Scotia air never is. I took a cab to the address on the card. It was a building in the financial district, understated, the name on the glass door etched small. Nothing flashy. Inside it was cool and very quiet. I gave my mother's name at the reception desk. The woman behind it made a brief call and then asked me to wait. A few minutes later, a woman in the dark blazer came to meet me. "Ms. Tremblay," she said, "please come with me." We walked down a corridor with pale wood paneling and soft lighting. No drama, no vault doors. Just a hall and a door at the end of it. In the office, she introduced herself as the account administrator. She offered me water, which I accepted. She opened a file on the table. "Your mother established her relationship with us in 2009, she said. "She has been a consistent client since then." I stared at the folder. "I don't understand," I said. "She was a nurse." "Yes," the administrator said. "She was very clear about that. She said it was important that the structure never look like more than it was." "What is it?" I asked. She turned the folder toward me. The numbers were not what I expected. They were more. Not in the way of someone who had inherited wealth or married into it. In the way of someone who had made careful decisions for a very long time and let those decisions compound quietly. The total was a little over $8 million Canadian. I put the folder down. "This isn't possible," I said. "It is," the administrator said gently. "Your mother was disciplined. She described herself that way once in our correspondence. Disciplined and patient. I thought about her coupon organizer, her 10-year-old car, the dent in the passenger door." "What was it for?" I asked. The administrator folded her hands. "Your mother designated the fund for 2 purposes. A portion was structured as an ongoing trust to support palliative care training in underserved communities across Canada, with a specific focus on rural Nova Scotia and Northern Ontario. The remainder was structured as a family provision with conditions attached, which I'll explain in a moment. You are named as the sole trustee." I thought of Marcus immediately. "Are there other beneficiaries?" I asked. "There are designated recipients for the palliative trust," the administrator said, "and a secondary provision for immediate family. That's in the documents. She slid an envelope across the table. There is also a letter, she said. She prepared it some years ago and updated it last spring. My hands were very still as I picked it up. My phone buzzed. Marcus. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Well? He said immediately. What did the lawyer say? I'm still reviewing things, I told him. Is there anything? He pressed. I looked at the number on the folder. There's something, I said. I need more time to understand it. A long pause. How much time? I didn't answer that. After I hung up, I opened the envelope. The paper inside was my mother's stationery, the pale blue kind she'd had for years with her initials at the top. Her handwriting was even and clear, the way she always wrote, not hurried. She began, "If you're reading this, then I didn't get to explain it in person. I'm sorry for that. I want you to know that the silence was not about distrust. It was about protection. Money changes who people become around it. I didn't want that to happen to you before I could prepare you." She wrote that after she retired from the hospital, she had continued consulting, quietly, for a network of palliative care programs she had helped establish in the late 90s. The fees had been modest but consistent. She had invested them carefully, conservatively, and never touched the principal. I watched people die for 22 years, she wrote. I watched families fall apart in those last weeks over things that didn't matter. I watched grown adults become strangers to each other because of what was written on a piece of paper. I decided a long time ago that what I left behind would not do that to my children. I designed this carefully so it couldn't. I read that line 3 times, she went on. The palliative trust is not negotiable. It will operate for 30 years regardless of family circumstance. That is my legacy and it is already protected. The family provision is yours to administer. I trust your judgment. I always have. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The administrator returned with a second folder. Inside were summaries of the palliative care programs her fund had already supported. Nursing bursaries at Cape Breton University, a mobile palliative unit in Kenora that had run for 3 years on her contributions. Training workshops in Yellowknife. Her name was on none of it. She had never said a word. The trust is currently valued at 8.2 million Canadian, the administrator confirmed. After structured disbursement to the palliative fund, the family provision sits at approximately 1.9 million. I let that sit. 1.9 million. Not generational wealth in the way people mean it, but enough to change the shape of a life. Enough to matter. I thought of Marcus. His debts, his attempts at business, the franchise he had bought and sold at a loss, the contractor work he kept picking up and dropping, the 2 times my mother had quietly cleared his credit balance, the way he had let himself into her house the morning before I left. What happens now? I asked. You assume full oversight as trustee, she said. The palliative trust operates independently through our office. The family provision is within your discretion, subject to the conditions your mother set. Are there conditions? She handed me a third document. There were conditions. Structured, specific, and very like my mother. I flew home 2 days later. The Halifax airport looked the same as always. Gray sky, familiar cold, the smell of salt coming through the arrival's doors. I picked up my car from the lot and drove straight to Dartmouth. Marcus's truck was in the driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of him and his phone face up beside it. You went to Singapore, he said when I walked in. I told him I had needed to deal with some paperwork in person. You lied to me. I gave you time, I said. He looked at the carry-on I was still holding. What did you find? I sat down across from him. I opened my bag and put the folder on the table. I didn't hand it to him. I walked him through it the way the administrator had walked me through it. She set up a trust, I said. For who? For palliative care programs across the country. Nursing training, mobile units, hospice support. He frowned. That's charity. It's her life's work. And us? He asked. What do we get? I looked at him carefully. There's a family provision. I'm the trustee. How much? Just under 2 million. He was quiet for a moment. Then, and you control it. Yes. He sat back. What does that mean? It means it's structured. It's not a check. It's a provision with conditions attached. What kind of conditions? His voice had gone careful, the way Marcus got careful when he was about to push back on something. Financial stability requirements, I said. She didn't want the funds dissolved or misused. There are accountability provisions. He laughed once. So she's managing me from the grave. She designed it to protect everyone, I said, including you. He stood up and walked to the window. The back garden looked the same as always, the bird feeder she kept full every winter, the flower beds she'd turn over every May. I had debts, he said. She knew that. I needed more than a cleared credit card. She helped you every time you asked. That's not the same as this. He turned around. $2 million. Half of that should be mine. It's not structured that way. I'll challenge it. I expected that. So did she. His jaw tightened. You can't keep me out of what she left. I'm not keeping you out of what she left. I'm not keeping you out, I said. There's a provision specifically for family stabilization. She included you. But it comes with conditions. What kind of conditions? Financial counseling. Documented progress. Annual distributions tied to accountability benchmarks, not a lump sum. He stared at me. You want to monitor me. I want to honor what she built. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. I'll talk to a lawyer, he said. I figured you would. He left without slamming the door. That was something, at least. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table and reread her letter. She had known this would happen. She had written around it with the same patience she brought to everything. I thought about the crossword she had left unfinished. 3 across, steady. I hired a lawyer in Halifax named Robert Wynne, who had dealt with international trusts before and who came recommended by the estate lawyer handling her will. He was thorough and unhurried, the kind of person who read every line of every page before speaking. This is clean work, he said after 2 hours with the documents. Whoever helped her structure this knew what they were doing. She did it over 15 years, I said. He nodded slowly. She thought in decades. Marcus filed within a month. Not a lawsuit exactly, but a formal legal challenge through the Nova Scotia courts, citing lack of disclosure and questioning whether the trust had been properly referenced in her domestic will. The Singapore structure, his lawyer argued, had been concealed from the estate. Robert called me the morning the paperwork arrived. This is standard pressure, he said. He's testing whether the structure holds. Does it? Yes, he said. The trust predates any claim by over a decade. It was referenced in her will. The executor has the documentation. This is frustration looking for a legal shape. The first hearing was in a courtroom in downtown Halifax, beige walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of room that makes everything feel very ordinary and very serious at the same time. Marcus sat at the other table. He looked tired. He didn't look at me when our case was called. His lawyer argued that my mother had failed to properly disclose foreign holdings to her estate. Robert responded that the trust had been established legally under both Canadian and Singaporean law, properly referenced in the domestic will, and administered with full documentation for 15 years. There was no evidence of concealment. There was evidence of privacy, which is not the same thing. The judge requested additional documentation and adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Marcus found me on the steps. You could make this simple, he said. How? Split it and walk away. I can't do that. It's nearly $2 million, he said. No one needs to know how it's divided. She would know, I said. I would know. He shook his head. You always wanted her to see you as the responsible one. I wanted to deserve it, I said. We didn't speak after that. The second hearing brought more documentation. 15 years of investment records, disbursement summaries for the palliative trust, a legal opinion from a Singapore firm confirming the trust's validity under international law. Robert presented it without drama. It was a lot of paper. The judge read carefully. What came next? I didn't expect. The retired judge who had handed me the card at the cemetery appeared as a witness. He had been a family court judge in Halifax for 30 years before his retirement. He had known my mother since 2003, when she had approached him for advice about how to structure something that would last. He had connected her with a Singapore firm. He had helped her understand what she was building. He testified quietly. He said my mother had been the most methodical person he had encountered outside of legal practice. He said she had asked him not to be named in any documents while she was alive because she did not want anyone to feel managed. Marcus's lawyer tried to suggest the judge had been an undue influence. The judge's response was even. She came to me with a plan already formed, he said. My role was to point her toward people who could execute it. I did not advise her on what to do. She already knew. The ruling came 3 weeks later. The trust was valid. The challenge was dismissed. The judge's written decision was 12 pages long, and I read every word. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood beside his truck in the parking lot. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the harbor. You weren't going to move on this, he said. No. He kicked at a piece of gravel. I thought she left me nothing. She left you something, I said, just not the way you expected. He didn't answer. I drove back to Dartmouth. I sat in her house for a long time. The bird feeder was empty and I filled it. The crossword was still on the table and I put it carefully in the drawer. 6 weeks after the ruling, I drove to Moncton on a Thursday. Marcus's townhouse looked lived in the way places do when someone is managing, but only just. The recycling hadn't gone out. A pair of boots was drying on the front step. He opened the door slowly. I figured you'd come, he said. Can I come in? He stepped back. His kitchen table had bills on it, not chaos but accumulation. The kind that builds when you keep meaning to deal with it and don't. I'm not here to win, I said. He sat down. Then what? Because she didn't want us to be strangers, I said. And I don't either. He looked at the table. I handled it badly, he said. You were scared, I said. She was everything. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, she used to call me every Sunday. Even when things were bad between us, she always called. I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. I owe money I shouldn't have borrowed. The franchise was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake and I did it anyway. I looked at him carefully. There's a family stabilization provision in the trust. I can activate it for you. Debt repayment structured over 4 years. A financial advisor paid for by the trust. Annual distributions, modest, tied to documented progress. He looked up. Conditions. Yes. He was quiet. You'd really do that? She already did it, I said. I'm just the one handing you the envelope. He laughed once. Short and not entirely happy. You sound like her, you know. I hope so. We sat there another hour. We went through the numbers. His debts, what it would take to stabilize over a realistic timeline. It wasn't dramatic. It was a spreadsheet and a cup of tea and the sound of the neighbor's dog in the yard. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. She really built all that, he said. A palliative trust, nursing bursaries. She watched people die for 22 years, I said. She decided what she was going to do about it. He looked out at the street. I thought she was just getting by. She was building, I said. He nodded slowly. We didn't hug. That's not us, not yet, but he held the door open until I got to my car, and when I looked back, he was still standing there. A year after the court dismissed Marcus's claim, we drove together to the cemetery in Halifax. The stone was simple, the way she wanted it. Her name, her dates, and one line she had chosen herself years before. She stayed. Marcus read it and didn't say anything for a moment. She was always here, he said finally. Even when we weren't paying attention, I said. He put his hands in his coat pockets. He had aged in the past year, but not in the way stress ages people. More like someone who had put something down they had been carrying too long. He had completed 8 months of financial counseling. His debt was 60% paid. He had taken a steady job as a site manager for a construction firm in Moncton, work he actually knew how to do, and had stopped chasing the next investment that would fix everything. He wasn't finished, but he was pointed in a direction he could maintain. Do you ever think about just keeping it? He asked. The family provision. Ending the trust. No. He nodded. Even after everything I put you through. Especially then, I said. He looked at the headstone again. I was wrong about her, he said. About what she was. I know. He cleared his throat. And about you. We stood there a while longer. The wind off the harbor found us even in the shelter of the cemetery trees. Some things about Halifax don't change. Before we left, Marcus laid one hand briefly on top of the stone. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. On the drive back into the city, I thought about the morning the retired judge handed me that card. The cold, the wind, the plain white card with the Singapore address. I had not been someone who chased things. I was a records administrator for a regional health authority. I drove a sensible car. I kept my bills sorted in a folder. My mother had been the same way. More so, but she had built something. Quietly, over 15 years, without telling anyone, she had turned a nurse's careful salary into a structure that would support other nurses and other patients and other families who were sitting in hospital rooms trying to understand that someone they loved was not coming home. You don't advertise the help, she had written. You just make sure it keeps going. The Palliative Trust had already dispersed its second annual round of funding. 3 bursaries to nursing students at Cape Breton University, a contribution to the mobile unit in Kenora, a grant to a hospice program in Prince George that had applied twice before and finally had what it needed to expand. Her name was on none of the letters. That was how she wanted it. The provision for Marcus would run for 4 more years if he stayed on track. He had asked, about 6 months in, whether the conditions would ever be removed. I told him that was up to him to prove, not me to decide. He had nodded and gone back to his spreadsheet. I still go to her house on Sundays. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. I keep the bird feeder full. I finish her crosswords sometimes, the ones she left partially done, though I'm not as fast as she was. Last month I found another notebook in the garage. Dates, amounts, initials I didn't recognize. 20 years of recorded generosity, none of it announced. People she had helped in small ways. A colleague's daughter's tuition, once. A patient's family who needed bus fare and couldn't ask. Things she had simply absorbed into her life without comment. I sat in the garage for a long time reading it. There were nights in the past year when I felt the weight of being the one who had to hold this. The decisions about what was justified and what wasn't. The oversight, the paperwork, the careful line between protecting what she built and letting some good come from it in real time. But every time I felt it becoming too much, I thought about what she left in that drawer with her passport, the sealed envelope, my name in her handwriting, not Marcus's name, not a solicitor's name, mine. She had chosen me not because I was better, but because she trusted me to carry it without making it about me. That's what the trust was. Not money, exactly. A test of character, administered posthumously by someone who loved you enough to believe you would pass. Marcus called last week to tell me he had paid off the last of the franchise debt. His voice had a different quality than it used to, less tight. Mom would have been pleased, he said. She would have said something practical, I told him. Like, now make sure your RRSP is sorted. He laughed. She really would have. She would have. If you're listening to this and thinking of someone who lived quietly, who never asked for credit, who built something without explaining themselves, you probably already know what I mean when I say the hardest part isn't finding out what they left. It's understanding why they left it the way they did. She stayed, her headstone says. That's the whole story. She stayed and she built and she trusted someone to carry it forward. I'm trying to be worth that. If this reached you today, leave a comment. Tell me about someone in your life who lived steady. Because I think there are more of them out there than we realize, and most of them will never make the news, and that's exactly the point. Stay with Stillbearing. We'll be here. There's a line my mother wrote in her letter that I keep coming back to. Money changes who people become around it. She didn't write that as a warning about greed exactly. She wrote it as an explanation for why she stayed quiet for 15 years. She had watched what money did to people at their most vulnerable. In hospital rooms, in hospice corridors, in the weeks after someone died, and she had made a decision a long time before I knew anything about it. I used to think patience was something passive, something you did when you had no other option. Watching what she built, I understand now that it's one of the more demanding things a person can choose. She made a deliberate decision every year for 15 years to leave the principal untouched, to keep contributing, To not explain herself, that's not passivity. That's a kind of discipline that most people never develop because it asks you to delay satisfaction indefinitely and to do it without anyone watching. Marcus didn't have that. That's not a condemnation of him. I don't think I would have handled it any differently if our situations had been reversed. He spent years trying to force outcomes. The franchise, the investments, the borrowing, each one was an attempt to compress time, to skip the part where you do the steady, unglamorous work and go straight to the result. It doesn't work that way. It rarely does. The result of that pattern wasn't just financial. It was the resentment that built up alongside it, the sense that everyone else had been given something he hadn't. By the time we were sitting across from each other in that courtroom, the money was almost secondary. What he was really fighting was the feeling that she had trusted me more than him. He wasn't entirely wrong about that. But he had the causality backwards. She didn't trust me because she loved me more. She trusted me because I had shown her over many years that I could carry something without making it about myself. That trust was built from small things. Showing up on Sundays. Listening without needing to fix everything. Not borrowing money I didn't intend to return. None of it felt significant at the time. It just felt like how you treat someone you love. But those small things accumulated into something she could rely on, and she relied on it. That's how character works, I think. It's not built in a crisis. It's built in the ordinary days when no one is watching and nothing dramatic is happening and you just do the thing you said you'd do. My mother did that for 22 years at the hospital, and for 15 years with that trust, and for every Sunday she called Marcus even when things were difficult between them. She stayed. That's what the headstone says, and she chose those words herself. What I've tried to carry forward is this. The decisions you make when nothing is at stake are the ones that determine what you're capable of when everything is. Marcus is learning that now, slowly, on his own terms. He didn't become a different person overnight. He put in the work quietly, month by month, and 6 months in, he sounded different on the phone. Less tight. More like himself. She would have been pleased. She would have said something practical. But she would have been pleased